Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. Let's start our video with a warm-up story about a petty revenge on a former employer. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you're new here and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new video every single day. Here we go. My old supervisor asked me to return my key card 3 months after I'd been let go from my old job. I was fired from my old job because they wanted me to do some extremely shady things that I was not comfortable with. Luckily, I'd already found a new job, unbeknownst to them, and was back working 3 days after they let me go. I'd always felt as though the way they fired me was classless and crappy, so now I can finally get the kind of ugly, petty revenge on them that I've always wanted. Say hello to the river, key card. That's what they get for not making employees sign any kind of documentation before giving them keys. Edit to add, my new job is actually about 5 minutes away from my old job, which is on my way home. Maybe tossing the key card for 10 seconds in a microwave might further your revenge. Fire risk. And our second story. The Diary of Jane. For setup, I'd been hired on as an acting store manager. Basically, for an entire 6-state region, I'd fill in whenever a manager was out of the store for longer than 48 hours. Vacation, sickness, maternity, etc. We were basically substitute teachers of the retail world. This was only temporary, and when a store manager position opened up, I could step in with 0 probation period. There were 3 of us in this role. I was the first hire of a rather ambitious new district manager, Callie. I interviewed her 3rd or 4th day on the job, and she was psyched about everything in the company and talked at length about her plans. Of course, all this ambition meant she bit off more than she could chew, and within 6 weeks she was burning out. Callie had originally planned to visit every store in her district over her first 3 months, but according to rumor, the previous DM, knowing he was retiring, had sort of slacked off, so all the stores had issues one way or another. She ended up spending far more time at each location than she wanted, which is why she hadn't made it to this one store, I'll call it store 333, at all. So Callie sends an email that she's heading down to check up on them just before she leaves, a semi-surprise visit. We get an email not long after saying that she needs an acting store manager there ASAP, asking for one of the 2 of us who were free, Victoria and I. Not 5 minutes later, there's a revision. She needs both Victoria and I. So knowing we're heading into a disaster, we each drive 4 hours to the store. Walking in the place is a mess. Not just normal retail mess, but actual dirty windows, literal dirt caked on the corners of the floor, burnt out bulbs, etc. Callie's just sitting at the manager's desk looking like someone hit her with a brick. She tells us that she walked in and the previous store manager, Jane, handed her her resignation and walked out. The only full-time employee was gone too. And there was a lot wrong with the store. So Victoria and I take over registers, finish out the day, and then the part-timer hands in her name tag and says she quits. This was sadly just the start of it. That night, we literally spent the entire night at the store. I can't tell you what order we found out the mess there, but over the next few days, it all unfolded. The old system in place wasn't really integrated between cash registers and accounting. So there was a step in there where managers would transcribe numbers. It seemed that Jane had been faking the numbers for cash. Oh, and the last 4 deposits disappeared, never taken to the bank, and nowhere in the safe. Plus, there were these mysterious bins in the front with heavily discounted manager sale items marked as cash only. We puzzled over this for a while before finding that occasionally Jane would mark shipments as coming in damaged and unsellable, items which mysteriously were the same as those in the bins. So, cash fraud, great. Then the next morning, none of the morning staff showed up. Victoria and I are running the store solo for a while Callie sat in the manager's office shifting through paperwork trying to figure out all that was wrong with the store. An employee shows up, but just to hand in their badge and tell us to stick it up our butts. One of the weird things we'd noticed was that there were far more people staffed for this store than made sense. Jane had 1 full-time employee, then a ton of part-timers, mostly each only working 4 hours a week. This didn't seem the weirdest thing about the store, but we later suspected she wouldn't have anyone there long enough to figure out things were shady. Almost all those employees were high school kids, or people who were there to earn spending cash rather than a living. None of them were really invested in the job. When we finally had an employee show up, she tells us the full-time employee had called her and fed her this line about how Jane, who apparently was very well liked by the staff, had been cruelly fired. Corporate was screwing them over and how they needed to make a stand. If all of them quit, the store would go under and they'd benefit. Somehow. Apparently, a really good number of them decided the statement was worth more than the job and decided to quit. Callie ends up telling me to call the entire staff one by one and ask if they plan to continue employment. I spent an hour with everything from slammed phones to cursing to lame excuses. Most talked about how they hated our corporate who was mean, and a few mentioned how corporate wouldn't even give them their bonuses. What? Now, end of year, Christmas time, all employees who'd worked more than 6 months would get a Visa gift card, value dependent on number of hours worked. I hadn't heard of any problems, neither had Callie, who forwarded it on to accounting. Meanwhile, knowing that we had basically no one to work the store, we sent out an email to the closest stores to see if they could spare a few employees. We'd pay for their transportation and meals while working. If travel was more than an hour, we'd pay for a hotel room. And they'd have a 50-hour week at double normal pay. This was during summer when there were a lot of college kids, so people jumped at it. By close, we had locked in about 12 people from 6 or 7 different stores to work starting the next day and staying for at least 2 weeks. This in addition to the 4 or 5 part-timers who hadn't quit on us. Meanwhile, all day it's calls from the corporate lawyers, etc. to Callie, who looks like she's ready to cry. We get word corporate is sending 2 representatives into town. Again, my timeline isn't entirely straight here, but in the next days, Callie finds out that all the bonuses were given out, sent to the store, signature required, all appear to have been redeemed. Then later I heard all were redeemed at the same Walmart. Oh yeah, Jane had stolen from her adoring employees. We later heard from the next door sub place that just before Callie showed up, Jane and the full-time employee had been loading boxes in their car out of the store. Wait, their car? Oh yes, the 2 were dating. And who knows what they'd just stolen? We also found out over the next days that inventory was a non-existent thing. According to the system, we had more negative quantities than positives, and none of our stock was made from antimatter. We tasked a few employees to re-inventory the store headed by Victoria, while I handle store operations and hiring new staff. She finds out that there's just boxes of stuff everywhere, tucked in nonsensical places, still in packing boxes, mixed in illogically. Inventory was nearly impossible as they kept finding stuff. A box in the bathroom, shipping boxes stacked in the back room, used as a table, a box stuck up in the damn ceiling tiles found by the electrician. I'm trying to retrain the old part-timers. Meanwhile, some realized they needed to basically erase how the store was run and start over. Others insisted that this is how it's always been done. Like layaway. Our company didn't do layaway. We never did layaway. Apparently Jane did layaway. But that's wrong, and I have no way of verifying what those customers spent. Lots of confusion and issues forwarded to corporate. 1 or 2 employees just had to be let go because they insisted on doing things Jane's way. The back room had been a mess, and I was sparing man hours just to clean. Cleaning up back there, they found a door that had been covered with empty boxes. It was locked, and Victoria and I were debating whether it was ours or led to the adjoining store somehow. Then one of the part-timers chimed in, something along the lines of, "That's the trash room. They locked it up when it got full." Now that employee was high school aged, and I think this was her first job, and she said it like this was a sane and logical comment, as though every business had a full trash room. So not really wanting to know the answer, I asked what a trash room consisted of. Apparently, if it was raining or they didn't want to go out to the dumpster, they'd just throw the trash in there. Callie had just sat down with the corporate guy when I walked into the office and informed them of this. They both just stared at me like I crapped in their Cheerios. A locksmith was called in to open the door, and we found a 15 by 15 foot room, chest high, with full boxes and trash bags and stuff. The only saving grace was that it was closed up long enough to not be fresh garbage, but an old musty garbage. At any given point over the next few days, we would have an employee wearing gloves and digging through it, a bag of receipts kept for evidence, a bag of trash from the bathroom, a box of unopened merchandise covered in fluids leaked from a questionable bag that may have contained food at some point, inexplicably a busted-up bicycle. The employees would come up shell-shocked on break, describing the weird horrors they found. At this time, I'm hiring a whole new staff. Normally, we did background checks and a lengthy interview. This was shortened to my 15-minute judgment calls on someone and can you start training tomorrow? As far as the thefts, etc., I can't tell you the end conclusion. Callie and the corporate guy kept that bottled up, but there were a lot of calls to the lawyer. But the end result was that the store needed a new manager, someone who could finish training the random new hires, handle the PO'd customers who suddenly saw their store turned upside down, handle inventory, and of course the angry ex-employees. Thankfully, they picked Victoria, and I went to my next, less stressful assignment. Ouch. Can't stand people like Jane that make friends with everyone, give perks, and end up screwing everyone. And our last story. You should feel lucky you have a job. Okay. I worked for 10 years in a very specialized industry, and every single project made money and got good customer satisfaction. Kinda why they came back to us again and again. My final project was a super rush, super important job with a set-in-stone end date. Think our original supplier has failed, but we need this job finished in time for the Olympics when the US president is due to visit, which the customer gave to us because of our expertise and for which my company promised me a promotion if I proved my worth. We achieved the timescale, made money, and customer was super happy as we pulled his butt out of the fire. So of course, my company's HR decided they could not give me the promotion because of a reorganization. When I complained to HR, their literal word-for-word response was, "You should feel lucky you have a job." It was my final project because I resigned. I heard through the grapevine that the next multi-million-dollar job they got from the customer was managed by a higher grade than me, but zero experience in this industry. Worked out the irony that they blocked my promotion, then gave my job to someone of a higher grade yet? The job went 3 times over the fixed price budget. The company decided that this part of the business was too high risk and pulled out altogether. 10 years of good, profitable business gone. Seems funny how they don't need to keep promises, but it's our head if we can't keep ours. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.